Hey, and welcome to Big News from WalletPop.com, part of the AOL network of broadcasts. I am Jason Cochran. Today we are talking about cashing in on comic book collecting. We have really great guests here today. I'm actually pretty excited about this one. I'll just introduce everybody now, and then we'll all sort of pile in. First, we have Kevin Frost. Kevin is here from Midtown Comics. He is a buyer, which means he is the gatekeeper of the stock room. Any back issues that come in, he grades, he decides if it's allowed in or not. We also have Phil Jimenez. He is here. He is a massive creator of comic books, and I'll have them both sort of tell you what they're up to these days. On the line, we have Laura Hudson from the comicsalliance.com. Comicsalliance.com. It's an AOL website all about, guess what? Hi, Laura.
Hi, how are you?
Well, fourth but not last, we have Paul Litch. He's the vice president of the Certified Guaranty Company, which most people just call CGC for short. And what they are, they're a member of the Certified Collectibles Group, which is an impartial grader of comic books, sort of an industry standard that everyone can agree on. And we're going to start with Paul.
Hi, hello.
Hey, because it's sort of one of the most important things about collecting comic books is the quality of the book itself. And once you have that benchmark laid down, people start to agree on what it is actually worth.
Yeah, and especially when you're dealing with buying and selling comics over the internet, it really increases buyer confidence. So once you have a certified book, you tend to know what you're going to get, and prices seem to set themselves.
So do people send you their comic books in a very carefully wrapped box with a certain, I guess you charge a certain amount per book, right?
Yeah, we do. Our tier structure is based on combination of when you need it back by and the fair market value of the book. We do have a modern tier for books published from the 1980s to the present, and those are, the least expensive tier for us to do. But we have a walkthrough tier for books that are worth a house.
So what's the starting price to get something graded by you guys?
The starting price is $17 for the modern tier. The walkthrough tier, which would be same-day service, starts at a minimum of $125 with 2.5% of the fair market value.
So essentially, though, you have to make sure that your book is probably going to be worth at least that in order to make it worth your money. I mean, obviously. So this is not just every book you want to have graded by you guys. You want to send only the prime stuff.
Yes.
And I think we don't have a sample here to show, but what happens is you guys look at it, you put your very, very, very particular, let's just say, you're kind of a harsh graders. You just very, very tough to get a top grade from you guys. You put it into a plastic, I think it's called a slab, is that right?
Well, we don't call it a slab.
What do you call them?
It's our certification process. It's encapsulated.
Encapsulated. So you can't open it. Once you've got it in there, you guys have checked to make sure it's legit. It's not a fake. It hasn't, been retouched or anything. You seal it into this thing. That is now the comic book. You can't leaf through it again.
You actually can remove it. We made the holder to be able to be opened and the comic to be able to be removed. A lot of people, almost every collector I know, loves to read comics and loves the smell and the feel. And
sure. What's to keep someone from slipping a fake in after you've already graded it then?
Well, it's all temper evident. The posts on the corners will shatter. It can be opened. It's not exactly easy to be opened. The inner books are in an inner well, which is heat sealed, and once that seal is broken, it turns white. We also have various counterfeit measures on our label.
But once it's open, doesn't it have to be regraded once you've opened this?
Yes.
All right, so you can open it, but then the grading that you've put on it is
all null and void.
It needs to be done again. Right, that's kind of my point. So really, if you want to preserve the grading. Now, I'm here with some Kevin, who knows a lot about the pricing of these books. He knows that. And can you tell us what the difference between an ungraded book and a graded book might be, all things being equal?
All things being equal, something that has been graded can often bring in a bigger price because it has, like you were saying earlier, sort of an agreed upon value added with the with the grading. But I would say that the main thrust of CGC is selling online, so you can know for certain that there is a third party that says this book is in this condition.
Can I ask a quick question?
That's Phil. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Just a quick question about grading. And generally, the people that are interested in those grades and are willing to pay a certain price for that grading, are they interested in selling the book later? What's the value? What's the added value to them, a collector who ostensibly is going to keep it for a lifetime, to having something graded?
It depends on the person. You know, some people we have people who submit books. It's their first book they got, and it's their most sentimental, and that's the one they want to have encapsulated. We get people who are going through a divorce, and they need to liquidate it, and they want the most value. We get people who are doing it for insurance reasons, so they can get their collection fully insured. And yes, there are people who do it to resell. That's probably the most common. But really,
Paul, what's the market like right now in this recession? Are people grading more or grading less?
Grading more. We're swamped. I mean, people seem to be getting out of their collections. Just recently, this past 2 weeks, we've had, Monday we had somebody drop off 20 short boxes of their collection to be done. We're getting a shipment of 15,000 books to come in to be done. It's amazing.
A great business to be in.
Who's buying the books?
People.
Now, I mean, these going off to stores? Are they going to conventions? Where are they going?
Or private collectors?
Private collectors. You know, most of them are going to hit auction houses, Heritage or Sotheby's, or they might end up on Comic Link or Pedigree Comics or Comic Connect, any one of those various online stores. Some of them are collections that are being dropped off by store owners. We do get a lot of things through the mail, but people can come and make an appointment at our office.
Where are you located?
We are out of Sarasota, Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a tough environment on comic books, Florida. Oh, humid. All those bugs.
We have a safe that's bigger than my master bedroom in my house. Yeah. And it's all air conditioned and lasers all around it at night. It's crazy.
Do you just a collecting question? Do you find that with the advent and popularity of trade paperbacks, collections, etc., that that has heightened or lessened the demand for collectibles? I find that I actually got rid of all my comics that I collected most of my childhood. I ran out of room, and because so many of them were reprinted, it's just easier for me to have them that way. I'm not actually interested in having the original. It's the art and the story that matter, not the book itself.
Yeah, I love graphic novels too, and I think it has made the new collector, and I'm talking someone who has just begun collecting in the last 10 years that we've been in the marketplace. I think it's made them a bit more savvy. There are going to be titles or storylines that they want in graphic novel form, and there are going to be issues, first appearances of, X-23 and NYX-3. There'll be those that are always sought after.
Paul, your company does not ascribe dollar value to any of these. You just ascribe quality, the condition. That's important to point out. Yeah. Where do people go if they want to find out what it's worth now that they know how it's graded?
Okay, well, I would suggest a couple of websites. You could go to comicspriceguide.com, and also I would suggest gpanalysis.com. GP Analysis is owned by a gentleman, George Pentella, out of Australia, and what he has done, he's come up with this formula that follows eBay auctions and Heritage auctions, and on his site you can click and see what a 12-month average for a certified book in a specific grade is, the last 90 days, the last 5 years.
Is that a membership-based site, or is it free to use?
It is a membership-based site, but I believe the membership is something reasonable, like $7 a month or something like that.
Now, Laura, I know I haven't heard from you yet. Is there anything you want to ask Paul? I know he's got a meeting he has to go to, and we're going to let him go and continue the conversation.
I guess I'm curious about what you might think in terms of, obviously you mentioned there are a lot of people more interested in graphic novels these days. I mean, is that something, I know some people are concerned about that in terms of the industry moving more towards comics as reading material rather than collectibles. Is that something that you're concerned about for the world of collectibles and comics as we move forward?
Myself personally, so far in 10 years we've done I'm going to guesstimate 1.4, 1.5 million comics, and there's still plenty out there. I think people are going to collect what they love, and as long as creators like Phil Jimenez keeps putting out top-notch stuff. I actually, kind of a funny story, I've seen Phil's signature today about 100 times because I'm doing books from San Diego Comic-Con.
Is that all Obama stuff?
Now, Phil's talking about, if you don't know, Phil is the guy who did the cover to, well, actually the whole issue, right?
Just the cover.
No, for The Amazing Spider-Man 583, which came out, was it February? Something like that, early this winter. This was all over CNN. You couldn't get a copy. Then it went through, I think, 5 or 6 more printings. I don't know. Something
we got
like that.
A total of 5 printings, actually.
Well, I have 3 of them here, actually. This is, I don't know which is which, but he's the artist who did that, and so he has signed a great many of these. He's really well known for that. And this, I saw on eBay, it was one of them was selling for, graded by you, your company. It was $234 for a 9.8 out of 10. So
wow.
And that's with his signature on. It's not bad. Of course, Phil's not getting that money, but
no. But I'm glad somebody is.
Yeah,
that makes me very happy.
Yeah.
Well,
if anyone else has any other questions for Paul, go ahead, jump in.
It might be too long of a question. It's just when I first got into comics when I was a teenager and worked at a comic book store, I used to grade comics, but we used a system. It was the letter system, very good, fine, very fine, etc.
Nomenclature, yeah.
Right. It's use numbers. Is there an equivalent? So if I gave something
Absolutely,
a 7.6, what does that measure up to?
A 7.5 would be a VF minus. We have it's a 10-point scale. It's broken down into 25 different points. We start at 0.5 and we go all the way up to 10. And you can go. I can give you a quick rundown of what the nomenclature would be.
No,
it's okay. I was just sort of curious.
Yeah, how it all works.
We do 7.5 would be a VF minus, 8.0 would be a VF.
What's the difference between a 10.0 and a 9.9?
Basically, one extremely minor manufacturing defect.
Like that little tuft of paper at the top corner that came out from the press, that kind of thing?
Exactly. That would be bindery issue and a bindery rub or bindery,
So it doesn't take much. I mean, people who think they have a mint copy, they can keep dreaming. Really, it's probably near mint.
Yeah, and really what we do when we grade, it's a difference between manufacturing defects because all books are created by machines and they're all not going to look the same.
Absolutely. Paul, thanks for calling in. We got some other stuff we want to cover, and we know you've got to run along.
Anytime.
But I appreciate you taking the time with us.
Having me. All right. Take care.
Bye now. All right.
Thanks.
We're going to continue on talking here. There's a couple things that people got to know if they don't know much about comic books, the things that are going to affect the value of what they have. They just can't pick anything up off the shelf and say this is going to be worth something. Well, first of all, a lot of collectors use this. It's the Overstreet Guide. This is last year's. It's one of the major.
Do you use it?
I have used it. Yeah. I mean, you seem not to be convinced of it.
Oh, I used to use those all the time.
Yeah, okay. So the Overstreet's considered, like, if you don't want to pay a membership to one of these sites, you can use this thing, and I think it's fairly considered an industry standard. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's sort of the fair price guide.
Right.
Some other price guides are considered to be more reactionary, and that's a lot more stable. But I would like to. For all the listeners, that it is indeed a guide.
A guide. Right. And some people also will think that their comic is worth more because they think it's graded higher than it actually is.
Again, just an industry standard of, well, what can you prove? And my guess is that because it was pretty rampant, there's a lot of fraudulent signings in sports memorabilia. Like, I think that sort of concern went to other collectibles, including comic books.
Well, I imagine there's a bit of provenance for something like this because, Midtown Comics is still open. They have a record of this writer, Brian Michael Bendis, is that his name?
Yes.
Having come and made this signature. So this is a little more of a secure thing here. But you buy something off the internet, off of eBay, or someone in their house there's no guarantee at all.
Right. I mean, it's just sort of like a safety thing. So you can say that it's signed. I mean, and you can sell it as such. But again, it's sort of, if you are selling your own books, then your customer there's a lot of faith that they're going to have to put into you.
Yeah.
So if ultimately though, is a book more desirable if it's signed by me or not signed by me?
If it's signed by you and there's some kind of
proof,
yes.
Okay.
What if you want to take a picture of yourself at a convention having Phil sign your book? Is that proof?
No. It's not.
So proof is very, very dicey in this case.
Yes.
So I would say, please, Laura, jump in.
No, sure. I think this hints also at an interesting fan versus commerce breakdown, which is, are you collecting for yourself because you're a fan and, you're a big fan of Phil Jimenez and you want to own a book signed by him, or is this more of an investment?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people have to ask themselves when they're entering into this. And I think that's, if you're going to get a book signed at a convention, especially in an environment where you're not going to get a certificate, you have to ask yourself, am I doing this for myself, or is this an investment? Because I think you have to approach it very differently depending on how you're going to do
Absolutely.
that.
If you're going to do it for yourself, you won't be reselling it anytime soon, so it really doesn't much matter.
It's just a sort of interesting side note about that. I actually can always tell when someone wants it for resale as opposed to wants it for fan reasons. For a long time, I made it sort of standard where I would sign a book to a person or sign a piece of art to a person. And if there was any sort of reaction to that, particularly negative, no, I just want your signature on it.
Yeah,
I knew instantly that person was interested in selling it or hoping for financial windfall of, I don't know, $7.
There is a financial side to this whole thing. I mean, I think a couple years here, it might be a safer bet to bet short on a comic book that's hot right now than it is to put your money in the stock market. Certain one of these, you could probably buy and sell pretty quickly over 4 or 5 months in return and get some money back, right?
Definitely, especially with Phil's Obama cover Spider-Man.
A good example.
Like, that is possibly the best example of the last maybe 5 years. Definitely the last year or so, where it is just like there's this madness, and with this particular item, possibly not since the death of Superman, it got to everybody. So it's
people
just
who don't normally buy them,
exactly, because it's just like, oh, I've heard of Spider-Man, I know about Spider-Man, I've seen the movie, whatever. But it's just like Spider-Man, Obama together at once. Yeah,
but it's very risky to be buying comic books thinking that they're going to be hot. And I think also what Laura was saying, sometimes you'll hold on to it because you'll love it, and then a year or two later, the panic is sort of settled and it's not worth much anymore.
Well, what struck me about at least the Obama cover is that the non-comic book fans who are buying it, I actually think they were buying it as part of that larger Obama mania. I think that it was a collectible. I'm not sure they were buying it thinking, I'm going to sell this for $200 later. The non-comic people, I really think that a lot of them were just generally, it was one more piece of Obama trivia to have in their collection because they were so excited.
I was actually working in a comic book shop at the time when that came out here in Portland, and there were a lot of people. I mean, you can tell when people are walking into a comic book store for the first time, and there were a lot of sort of moms and grandmas coming in, and they said, I've heard about this Obama comic, and do you have any more Obama comics? And fortunately for them, there were a lot more Obama comics. It became a whole part of a collectible phase that almost had less to do with comics than it did about the content, which I think is something that's kind of rare in comics.
Kevin, how many books a year sort of are really hot and then are off the boil within 3 or 4 months? So you have to cash out quick if you're gonna. And it's dangerous. You have to know what you're doing too. But are there a lot of opportunities like that?
I wouldn't say there's that many with recent books, and again with the Obama cover, it's so rare because there, as Laura was saying, there's basically after the success of this, every other comic book publisher is trying to get in on it as well.
Yeah.
So with something like this, right now, it's very difficult to. It's very much a gamble with current comics to think, oh, this is going to catch on, because a good example would be there's a Marvel icon title called Kick-Ass, and it was optioned to a movie. There's a trailer out now, and after and so currently like it's a hot item and like it might sell for like $10 or so, but I would imagine that like after the movie comes out, like it's probably going to calm down.
So you really sort of have to keep one finger on the pulse of the industry to know sort of, okay, it's time for me to sell if I really want. If I'm not keeping it, as Laura says, for the pleasure of it, it's time to try to sell this to Kevin.
Yes, yes. And
there's a lot of variant covers. The variant is like they'll have the standard cover, and then they'll have several other versions that the publishers put out. And it seems like they're doing it to get the collectors in a frenzy and to sell more books. And then that seems to get
comics are a business. At the end of the day,
I just showed you three different printings of the Obama cover and you did all 5, right?
Yes, we added artwork to the 5th one because they were doing so many variant covers, and essentially all they were doing is swapping the art, that we added art to the final printing, which is actually my favorite printing of them all.
In traditional, usually it's the variant printings that are more scarce, and so therefore, for a little while anyway, they're more valuable and therefore more resaleable. But that tends to simmer out after a few months, doesn't it?
Very much so. Maybe even after like 2 or 3.
See, here's one. One of these was worth a lot more than the other when it first came out. Now they're worth about the same. And this was maybe 10 years ago. Their variant cover, I think this one is the standard one, and this one is the special one that was hard to get. And now they're, if I had, because I didn't sell this in time, I lost the value.
Right. Did you buy 2 of them thinking you were going to sell one?
No, I bought them because I wanted them.
Right. So does it really matter?
No, not to me. Not to me, but there are some people who'd like to make a little, extra money right now, and, but you can do it that way.
I mean, I think it may also be worth mentioning that there was a big speculator boom back in the 90s that really did focus on variant covers, and that sort of built a bubble up to a certain point that later ended up bursting and leaving a lot of people without the value that they originally anticipated in their books.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that's something we're heading towards again, but it is something I think to think about in terms of the larger context of variant covers when we talk about them in a speculator context.
It's dangerous, isn't it? Just to speculate.
Yes.
And it does take the joy out of it as well, to a degree, unless your joy is money.
But that's actually legitimate. I was asking earlier, I'm still very curious about why and how people collect comics. As I get older, I've been doing this now for almost 20 years, and I know the sort of pleasure I get out of the material, but I'm amazed by the people who see it essentially as a financial investment.
That's right.
So can I ask you, you mentioned before when you're signing the books, you can tell, when someone wants it for themselves or whether they want it for speculation. Does it matter to you as a creator when you're signing that? Does it make any difference what their intention is?
The only time it ever made a difference, generally no, I would say, because they've made their purchase and they can do whatever they want to with it. Beyond that, I have no control, and I wouldn't deign to try to exact control. It was just very interesting to me, particularly when I travel in Europe, where they want everything signed to them and for them, and it's a much more personal act. I find in America, particularly large conventions, it's not that. It's like, please don't mar my comic, don't sign it to me, make sure you sign it in this space. And my sense is that they're either they're hyper obsessive about it, or they intend to sell it later. Ultimately, it doesn't bother me. I think where it did bother me was when I would sign something and then later that night, literally that night, see it on eBay for $60 or $70. And I thought that just seemed tacky.
It would be tacky if you did it, especially.
It would be really tacky. But I'm tacky. Anyway, that stuff bothered me a little bit, mostly because I thought, can't you just wait for a couple of days? Can't you wait till this event is over?
Sure.
And it seemed sort of rude also because for me, I give away signatures and sketches for free. I don't charge for them. And for me, it's a gesture because people spend money on my comics. They come to these shows. They support my industry. I'm happy to sign something or do a drawing for them just to say thank you. And so that was really the only time I ever took it personally, was when they took my thank you and then tried to sell it later that night for a hefty price tag. But generally, once they bought a comic, it's theirs.
You're allowed to do it.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Are we finding that the publishers are putting out too many special, like, one-shots and miniseries? They've been doing it for a very, very long time, but is there a certain cynicism in that as well? It's cynical for fans to get signatures, but the publishers are also being quite cynical and trying to produce stuff they know the fans are going to buy en masse.
But I mean, you almost can't blame them, because if you realize, and this is true, that if you put out a comic and you put out the same comic with a different cover someone's going to buy 2 instead of buying 1.
Oh, no, I don't criticize it. And I think if it keeps the business alive, that's even better.
It's driven by fans. It's entirely driven by fans.
So, you mean, but it's happening on both sides of the table, you know.
I can't figure out if it's a chicken or the egg. Honestly, as I was saying earlier, comic books, like all media, exist to sell advertising space. They exist to make money. That's what they do. That's what they're about. Hopefully the art and content, hopefully the art they create is sort of a lovely byproduct. But essentially they're there to make money. I understand that. I understand that going in. That said, I find that companies are much more reactive than proactive. Fans, they put out a miniseries, fans go nuts for it. They put out another miniseries, very similar, fans go nuts for it. I really think that if customers, if they modified their consuming habits, the companies would follow.
Sure.
Obviously, there's a certain amount of cynicism and plotting and probably, that sinister business aspect of comics where they're going to put up product going, oh my God, they're going to eat this stuff up. But then when they do eat it up, all that does is feed into that base desire to do another product very similar to it. I'm amazed at how reactive our business is to the consuming habits of our customers.
Yeah.
Well, and you can see it as well with the mega crossovers with the titles that run sort of through all of the books. There are a lot of fans that complain, why do we have so many mega crossovers? They think
and
that
creators complain too.
Creators complain, everybody complains, but the fans complain, but they still buy it, and they'll buy every comic when it comes out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they sort of reinforce it in that sense, but I think that it wouldn't be bad to be a little savvier about the fact that if you don't like something, don't buy it, and there'll be less of it.
Well, once you have it, though, you're more likely to keep it forever or resell it, right? Kevin, are people trying to sell their comics right now?
Yes, very much so.
Same that what Paul said.
I would agree that people are selling their comics now, but I would say that most of the people who are more sort of business-minded with their comics are not the people selling. Right now, it's a lot of the people selling, at least to me, are people who have 10 to 30 comics and I'll sell these now and I'll get $1 million because there was an article in the Daily News about how Superman #1 sold for $1 million. So they are entitled to $1 million as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, a number of people are selling their comics, but there's very much a sort of line with what with books that you're going to sell. And concerning books as investment, for any listeners not hip to the jive of comics, it's just, if you're looking into comics as an investment, in general, stuff from 1965 and before is a much better investment, but that stuff's going to run you a lot more money. And stuff now, the idea of I'm going to buy some comics to sell later is a much less certain thing. And I worked at a comic book store in the 90s. It went under because of the speculators, because it just, at one point people were buying 20 copies of a Batman miniseries and hoping that, this will put my kid through college. And now that's in a 3 for $1 bin. And it's just that's a lot of what
should I hold on to my comics for 40 years to see any value? Is it a really long-term bond?
See, I don't even know if that's going to affect it, because a lot of these books, there's hundreds of thousands or millions of copies, and the distribution channel for comics changed in the 70s so that basically comics stopped being returnable, so there's just so many more of them now.
Right. There's a lot more out there. Then that's one reason that they're so valuable in the plastic game.
A lot of people ask me so I just need to hold on to these longer, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It could be.
It's not a magical function of time. I mean, one of the reasons why Golden Age books are as valuable as they are is not only because there's these early first appearances, but also because back then comics were treated as more disposable. So everybody threw them away. You didn't have people putting them in Mylar bags, and fewer of them are around now. Whereas today you have larger runs of comics being, immediately slipped into Mylar bags by people. And so
the minute they get home from the comic book store, they slip them in the Mylar bag and the backing board.
It just suggests to me that you should keep them for the value, for the inherent value, the joy they bring to you, and sort of, as opposed to potential financial value. It seems like the worst reason.
But there is a tragedy to a really valuable comic book that is in terrible condition.
Oh, I don't mean you shouldn't.
I hold up my example now. It is a giant size X-Men one that is completely battered and beat up. And if this was in near mint or mint, it would be worth what, $1,300 maybe. And instead,
would you sell it?
Do you want it?
No. I'm saying.
No, I like it. This is my reading copy. I've got another.
Like that's something to me that it's the beauty in it. It's sort of old. It's been used. It's been worn. That's what comics.
Some child loved it.
Some child loved it.
It was stuck in the garage for years, and it's all brown. And
I think that's actually really beautiful. I mean, I know it's hard to imagine when we're talking about the financial compensation or potential financial compensation of a collectible, but the beauty of that is that it has been used and read over and over and over, and that in and of itself is worth all the money in the world.
No, I'm not sure
I don't know. That's going a little far.
All the money?
Not all the money, but it's certainly worth something.
It is certainly worth something.
There's a value there that's hard.
It's in here. What was that, Laura? What were you saying?
I was going to say, I have no idea how this would affect the CGC value or the book value of this, but if you do have very valuable old comics, and granted this costs a lot, so you have to make sure it's worth it, but comic book repair is possible. You can take an old collectible Golden Age comic to someone who can repair the comic, restore some of the coloring, restore tears, and do that sort of thing if it's important to you as a collectible. Again, I'm not sure how that affects
Kevin,
the book value.
Kevin, how does that affect the value?
Repairs are decrease the value. The most collectors want, even if it looks worse, if it has to be authentic, it has to be the real thing. That's why reprints are so rarely worth anything. Again, an exception being the Obama Spider-Man. But usually the idea of that you're trying to like fake it or something. There are services that do produce it, but it's this idea of authenticity that you are interfering with.
It's like an old Chip and Dale dresser. Don't strip it down and put on a new varnish, because part of the appeal is its age.
Right. It
sort of speaks to what Phil was just talking about.
I'm sorry, that translated as Chip and Dale's dancer?
No, don't. If you strip down a Chip and Dale dancer, it's a completely different dollar value.
Suddenly, I was like, what conversation?
And you put the money somewhere else as well. So yeah, not necessarily. I just want to add real quickly. Also, first appearances of almost all the major characters. I just held up an X-Men that was the first appearance of many, like Storm and other classic Nightcrawler, classic X-Men characters. If you get a first appearance of a big character, that can also be value.
Certainly. In the industry, we usually call them keys, like key issues. It's either the first issue of a series that is very long running, or usually a first appearance, say, of like Wolverine, Silver Surfer.
And I'd also
Spider-Man.
heard a rumor that if it's a really hot new comic, you get the first issue, obviously it's worth a lot. If you also do the second issue, it might be worth a lot too, because they haven't yet adapted the print runs for the demand. Is that true?
Yes, that can be true with newer things, but again, with newer books, it's about sort of short selling. But for almost always, an issue 2 and 3 are going to have a significantly lower print run than an issue 1. But it really depends. Is that series going to take off?
You have to really have your finger again on the pulse to know. You can't get Archie and Jughead's Adventures Time, issue 1, 2, and 3 that just put out this year and assume it's going to be valuable. No, you have to sort of know what the kids are doing today.
Right. And like all investing, it's a bit of a gamble. You're gambling that this series is going to last long enough so that that issue 2 and 3 will actually be worth
Well, unlike the stock market, though, you can love these things even if they're not worth anything. You can't love a stock certificate unless you're a little weird that way. Phil, speaking of what the kids are doing today, what are you doing today? What are you up to these days?
I'm currently drawing the Astonishing X-Men for Marvel Comics, written by Warren Ellis.
Wow.
Yes, it's all very exciting.
When does that start? When does your run begin?
I believe it comes out, the first issue comes out in October. We're seeing color proofs now. It's very beautiful. And it's great. I've worked with Warren Ellis a couple of times over the years. I've worked on the X-Men a couple of times over the years. It's a perfect fit. It's a joy every day to wake up and, as I say, roll out of bed and go to my studio to go to work. But very seriously, it's been a delight. So
excellent.
I hope people enjoy it.
I have to look for that. Kevin, that's gonna have some heat on it when that comes out.
Certainly. I mean, like both either of those names and X-Men, so all of them together is going to be great.
Yeah. And Laura, you're working at comicsalliance.com. Let everyone go there. It's a fantastic blog of ongoing news in the industry.
Yep, Comics Alliance with an S.
Yeah.
Middle.
Pluralized comics. and so everyone knows Midtown Comics doesn't just sell to Midtown New York City. It does new mail order at midtowncomics.com.
A great store.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, Kevin, if I was going to bring you a comic and it's worth, let's say, $80 in the Overstreet Guide. How much do you give me back for that? Even though you're not going to give me the full $80.
Right. It depends on, even if it's an 80, it's going to depend on the turnaround. Like, what title is it? And again, the condition. Like some titles, even regardless of the dollar amount, I'm very hesitant to say.
Yeah,
like,
I can tell you're giving me the runaround like an old-fashioned stockbroker.
Buy low, sell high.
So, yeah, fair enough. Right. So don't assume that you're going to get the value that you find in whatever price guide you're using.
Oh,
inflated
no.
or not. Even if it's a low ball, you still may not get what you think you would if the guide was in a guide. Also go
Not if you're going through a store. I mean, I love Midtown, but if you're going through a store, you're going to a middleman. If you do something like going on eBay, you're taking that directly to the consumer. So there is the potential there to get more.
Absolutely, and it's great for a seller, eBay, but it's a bit riskier for a buyer, is it not? Unless it's graded, as we were talking about before.
No, absolutely, because unless it's graded, I mean, you're going by what they say it is or what you can tell from a smaller picture. So there's certainly more risk there for a buyer.
I think we've just scared everybody away on this talk about grading and condition and getting ripped off and things losing heat. But there's a lot of opportunity, and if not for money, then at least you have some fun with the stories and with the art.
Hear, hear.
And there's fun to speculation, too. I mean, I think it's important to talk about some of these downsides and some of these pitfalls, because a lot of people come into it and say, oh, my kid's going to get through college on this comic, and it's not a realistic way to approach speculation.
It's the same way for the stock market.
Sure, but I mean, that doesn't mean that, one, that there isn't some potential for profit, and two, that it can't be fun simply in the act of speculating and collecting.
Yep, absolutely. That's very true. All right, guys, I think unless we have anything to throw in on this topic, we will wrap it up. I think we haven't covered it exhaustively, but we can only go for so long, unfortunately. and Phil's got to ice his hand. He's working real hard these days. So, everybody.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for stopping in, having a chat with us. Thanks, Laura. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for more, go to wallpop.com. This has been Big News from wallpop.com. I'm Jason Cochran. This has been part of the AOL network of broadcasts, and we're done. See ya.
Bye.